Chapter 13. A Divine Blade. That same day, the Alago forces suddenly went on an all-out offensive. Seems like your name had quite the impact, Sir Roland. Who knows if they want to take you down for glory, or just take you hostage, but having you say we defeated the army that came through Rueda made it sound all the more credible. There was a mix of emotions on Roland's face when he heard Kaoru's words. Kaoru, Roland, and the others were on a raised hill near the front lines, standing out plain as day while on horseback, all on purpose, of course. The front lines were already embroiled in mortal combat as both armies clashed against each other. If Kaoru were to use all the powers she had at her disposal, she may have been able to reduce the amount of soldiers who died in the war, but what would have happened if she did? It would have been an overwhelming victory for them with the power of the goddess on their side. There was no honor in winning like that, and neither the winners nor losers would be satisfied with that sort of outcome. There'd be no solace for the families of the soldiers who died in battle. Kaoru had come here fully intending to wield her powers as much as she could, but it wasn't to help one army completely destroy the other in a one-sided battle. It was to keep casualties to a minimum for each side and bring this whole war to an end. She was merely waiting for her most opportune chance to intervene. "Hey, Sir Roland. Start going around and acting like a complete weirdo, if you please," said Kaoru. "And why would I do that, exactly?" Roland answered, not looking particularly enthused by her request. "If you start acting suspicious all of a sudden, it should make the enemy worried that their prey is going to make a run for it or try to do something unplanned for. It should be enough to make them look your way every once in a while to check on you. While they're distracted with you, it should put our own soldiers at an advantage." "All right, fine." Roland began wandering around aimlessly, occasionally waving at no one in particular, all for the sake of the soldiers. He was a fine example of what a superior officer should be. After a while had passed, there was an obvious change in the enemy's tactics. Instead of focusing on other, much more essential areas to attack, they'd begun sending their troops to the small hill Kaoru and Roland were on. Several soldiers on horseback were spearheading the charge, with countless other foot soldiers following behind them. They couldn't have brought horses with them over the mountains, so they had probably acquired the horses from local sources. "All right, looks like they took the bait. Let's wait for them to get a bit closer before you lead them straight into the ambush we've set up for them with our own soldiers. I'm going to get myself a better spot to watch it all go down." The hill had no influence on the battle, and would have been completely ignored under all other circumstances. If it weren't for the fact that there was such tantalizing bait being dangled in front of them here, this spot would have no strategic value whatsoever. It'd just be a spot with a harmless-looking girl, and wasn't worth diverting soldiers to send over there. "I know," Roland said as he stared at the soldiers advancing upon them. The squad of enemy soldiers cut a swath through the Belmore troops in their way, getting even closer to Kaoru and Roland. They looked to be a group of Alago's most elite, so they must have made capturing Roland one of their top priorities. The balance of troops on the field had broken after diverting soldiers to send this way, allowing the Belmore soldiers to gain the upper hand. Everything was going according to plan. All that was left now was to surround them after leading them into their ambush, annihilating and reducing the Alago presence on the battlefield. "It's almost showtime. Make sure they get a good look at you out there." "I know," Roland answered back. He raised his hand as high he could to draw attention to himself before shouting out his next order. "We're heading down there. Everyone follow after me." He descended the hill, gradually moving in a direction without any friendly Belmore troops to make it easier for the enemy to follow him. Now then, time to wait and see how this all plays out. Wars in this world were by no means quick affairs. The battle had only just begun, and it'd still be some time before Kaoru would step in, maybe even a few days at that. It wasn't a good feeling watching others in a battle to the death, but this was war. Only the most foolhardy of optimists would think this would be resolved without anyone dying. While Kaoru was hanging back and waiting for the action to unfold, Ed hesitantly spoke up. "Hey, little missy. What's up? It might just be me here, but is the enemy totally ignoring the bait and coming straight for us? Oh. The Alago soldiers had received very specific orders on who to capture. Their top priority was the girl said to have received the blessing of the goddess and have the ability to make healing potions. Their second highest priority was anyone from the royal family. Third were any cabinet ministers or higher-level aristocrats. They were free to ignore the other targets if it meant securing their number one priority, even if it meant losing massive amounts of troops in the process. They'd even received word about what the girl in question looked like. Around 10 to 12 years old, black hair and black eyes, and a cute face with the harshest glare in her eyes. And who else had arrived alongside Roland, the brother of Balmore's king, but a little girl who matched that very description. She'd not only brought with her an abundance of healing potions, but was even going so far as to stand on the front lines of the battlefield. The elite squad of soldiers that had broken off from the main army wasn't going for Roland but for Kaoru. Not only that, but for some reason, Roland and the other troops had left that girl all on her own as they headed off somewhere. There was no better chance than this, and they weren't about to pass it up. Crap. They got me surrounded. The soldiers rushed to form a circle around Kaoru so she wouldn't be able to get away on horseback. They took advantage of Kaoru panicking over what to do, not giving her any time to figure out her next step. They managed to form a semicircle behind her, gradually closing in as they made the circle tighter. The group of soldiers in front of her were coming in closer and closer. Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. You think you can get us out of here, Ed? That's a no can do, Missy. Well, can't say I saw this one coming. Should I go with an explosion here? No, there's no point in doing that. All I'd end up with is a bunch of dead bodies on my hands. I may be able to kill a few off with poison, but there's too many of them to take them all on. What should I do? Make an explosion big enough to create an escape route. But they might start firing off arrows if I try to run away. I think I might actually die if one of those hits me. I'm pretty sure they're not going to kill me if they actually catch me. There should be plenty of chances to escape. While Kaoru was wrestling over what to next, the circle of Alago soldiers had steadily closed in on her to try and capture her unharmed. She couldn't break through them since they had their swords and spears pointed solely at her. Several of them had even sheathed their swords and moved closer to drag Kaoru down off her horse. Right when Kaoru found herself out of options and unable to figure out what move to take next, the Alago soldiers on horseback suddenly changed direction. Is that Francette? Francette had turned around after realizing something was wrong, Roland and 4 other Imperial Knights desperately chasing after her. The soldiers didn't stand a chance. They were up against Francette, a veritable demon of a warrior, Roland, the valiant brother of the King of Balmore, and a group of the most elite warriors the kingdom could provide. This wasn't a combination the makeshift Alago cavalry could handle. Francette and the others broke through the enemy soldiers surrounding Kaoru, dismounting their horses and forming up around her. Everyone was more than capable of fighting on horseback, but their main area of expertise was doing battle on foot. Being on horseback usually gave you the advantage in a fight, but when it came to truly skilled soldiers such as themselves, they found horses just weren't able to keep up with them. Being surrounded by soldiers while on a horse meant they wouldn't be able to protect themselves against any attacks made from the rear or the side they weren't holding their weapon. Dealing with multiple enemies at the same time was near impossible as well. Having someone they needed to protect on top of that meant keeping the fight on the ground was their only choice. Sorry. Looks like I screwed up here, Kaoru said, disheartened. The 6 people who'd rushed to her aid laughed it off, saying it was about time they had a chance to show what they could do. Thus marked the beginning of their fierce struggle. Roland and the other 4 Imperial guards were all brandishing short swords as they charged into battle. Despite the name, they weren't any shorter than the average sword or anything. Soldiers on horseback generally carried long swords, while foot soldiers went with short swords. The fact that they used them just proved they weren't merely cavalry. Though short swords were usually wielded with one hand, they were using both since they didn't have shields to carry in their other. Even without shields, they just had to block any strikes coming their way with the sword itself. Hack, parry, stab, slash, repeat. Unlike a katana, these blades weren't for slicing clean through people. They would overpower their opponent by force crushing them beneath the blade. They still had enough of an edge to them to lop off a limb, though. Francette, on the other hand, had a bastard sword as her weapon of choice. It was a sword that could be wielded with either one or two hands, but was much heavier and longer than a short sword. It wasn't the type of weapon a girl who looked to be in her mid-teens should be able to handle under normal circumstances, that is. It should go without saying that Francette's circumstances were anything but normal. Her sword would drag along the ground if she tried to wear it on her hip like normal, so she usually had it strapped on her back. Though she wanted to use an even larger and heftier sword to put her Herculean strength to use, her size meant it was impossible for her to carry anything larger than she had now. Francette swung her bastard sword with all the grace and finesse of one wielding a rapier in fencing, gleefully mowing down any enemy soldier who had the poor fortune of standing before her. Screams of agony and pain filled the air as the piles of corpses and injured grew in the wake of her warpath. "Aye, it's fearsome, Fran," the Alago soldiers whispered, their voices trembling in fear. The Balmor forces, who had been lying in wait for the ambush, realized the plan had gone awry, cutting their way through the enemy lines and surrounded the enemy on both sides to eliminate them. Chaos and confusion dominated the fight as the battle raged on. There was only one thing that both sides were clear on: do not harm the girl. The fight had devolved into such chaos that there wasn't anything else Kaoru could do. Using her nitroglycerin potions or any other sort of chemical attack would just get her allies caught up in the crossfire. She could try using her item box powers here, but that would ruin the story she had been pushing so far about her being a normal human who just so happened to be friends with the goddess. But I guess the same thing would happen if I started making everything explode, her. With the amount of fallen enemy soldiers reaching the triple digits, Kaoru breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that, even though she was in the middle of a battlefield, she was at least safe for now. That's when it happened. Roland had managed to deflect an arrow with the right shoulder of his armor to protect one of his allies, but his sword had stopped moving in the process. An Alago soldier thrust their own sword forward, not one to let this chance slip them by. The sound of metal clashing against metal rang out through the battlefield. Francette had lost her balance from overextending to deflect the attack, gripping the shattered remains of her sword. It was already at its limit from taking the brunt of Francette's monstrous strength, but forcing that slash had finally caused the blade to give in. Taking full advantage of this perfect chance, the enemy had plunged a single spear deep into the right side of her chest. Fresh blood spurted from the newly carved hole as the spear was ripped out of her. "Fran!" Roland caught Francette before she could hit the ground. I did it. I took down fearsome Fran," the Alago soldier cheered. The next instant, his head exploded into countless tiny pieces. "Don't gimme that crap." The blood had rushed to Kaoru's head. Any thought of trying to keep to her story about being a normal girl had been pushed from her mind. While she was the same girl who had said she didn't care if soldiers died. Since that was their job, the moment she saw the spear pierce Francette's chest and the blood spurting from her wound, nothing else mattered anymore. It was different than watching countless soldiers dropping like flies. Once it was someone she was fond of, that's what made the difference. She knew how contradictory she was being, but despite that, she couldn't stop her blood from boiling. She patted Ed's neck. He didn't need her to say anything to know what that meant. He knelt down, letting Kaoru off his back. The Alago troops around them had gone dead silent, though they may have gotten used to the blood from their enemies splattering on them. It seemed they weren't exactly used to the same thing happening with the brain matter from one of their allies' heads exploding. The stillness was only momentary, however. The sounds of fighting still raged on all around them. Kaoru turned her gaze skyward. The next instant, the thunderous roar of an explosion ripped through the battlefield. It could have been the work of the goddess or the work of a devil, or maybe even an omen of a catastrophe to come. The booming explosion that rocked the battlefield had brought the fighting to a halt. A pillar of golden clouds had formed around Kaoru, as if to show exactly where the sound had come from. Then she shouted for all to hear. "I'm about to go through with an important ceremony, so you all just shut up and watch. If you want to keep fighting, then do it the hell after." Her voice wasn't loud enough to reach the entire battlefield, but it still traveled decently far due to her elevated position. Word would eventually travel to the rest. No one knew what would happen to them if they tried to go against her. Kaoru took another look in France's direction. Though she looked gravely injured, it seemed like she'd be able to hold out a little longer. Kaoru walked toward her and Roland. "And now's our chance. Quick, grab the Ange." Bang. The soldier who tried to move in to capture Karo suddenly had his head blown clean off his shoulders. No one else dared move an inch anymore. Kaoru stopped a few meters away from Francette, the blood from her pierced lungs dribbling from her mouth. Then, in a loud, commanding voice, Kaoru proclaimed to her, "Francette, your life is the very epitome of what a knight should be. You dedicated everything you had to protecting your lord." Francette gave a weak yet satisfied smile as Roland supported her body. "It's not exactly the most ladylike life for a girl to live though, is it?" Francette looked to be in minor shock at such harsh words. "That is why I shall give you a gift for your next life." "What would you like? Better facial features? Glossier hair? Skin as smooth as silk? A bountiful bust? Go ahead, make your choice." "I want power. I want the power to protect Sir Roland again." Francette sputtered, blood dripping from her mouth as she used every last ounce of her strength to get the words out. "I thought you'd say that," Kaoru said, walking toward Francette again. "It's a foolish request, but one I think you should fulfill in this life, not the next." With a flick of her wrist, Kaoru was suddenly holding a potion bottle that had appeared out of thin air. Opening the lid, she poured the contents inside Francette's mouth. At Francette couldn't help but let out a gasp of shock as she found all her wounds healed in the blink of an eye.